Russia has for weeks been massing troops and tanks along the Ukrainian border.
President Xi has accelerated the military intimidation.
Violent spiral between Israelis and Palestinians.
The military has carried out a coup d'etat in Myanmar.
Afghanistan's government has fallen to Islamist militants who make up the Taliban.
Taiwan's president is warning that if the country falls to China, it would trigger catastrophic consequences.
Ukraine says that Moscow is preparing a sea and ground attack.
Chaos at Kabul's airport, a sign of the distress.
Israel has responded with devastating airstrike.
2021 has been a year marked by conflicts. From the return of the Taliban in Afghanistan to China's rising aggression against Taiwan and Russia's hard stand in Ukraine, one word that best describes the year is tumultuous. Here are the top 5 conflicts that rocked the world in 2021. Tensions between Israel and Gaza soared after protests in mid-April. Israel allegedly imposed harsh restrictions on Palestinians and prevented Muslims from gathering on the steps outside the old city to pray during Ramadan as they traditionally did. The conflict escalated on 7th May when Israeli police reportedly stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem and fired rubber-coated bullets, tear gas and stun grenades at worshippers. Meanwhile, Palestinians were holding protests against 6 Palestinian families being forced to give up their homes in Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem. Many believe the Israeli aggression in the Al-Aqsa Mosque was a retaliation to these protests. On the 10th of May, Hamas, the Palestinian militant group that rules Gaza, issued an ultimatum to Israel to remove its forces from the Al-Aqsa compound and from Sheikh Jarrah. The warning was ignored. Hamas launched hundreds of rockets into Israeli territory, and Israel responded with airstrikes on Gaza. Hundreds of Palestinians, including women and children, were killed in the Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. About a dozen people, including children, were also killed on the Israel side.
The fighting risks dragging Israelis and Palestinians into a spiral of violence with devastating consequences for both communities and for the entire region. It has the potential to unleash an uncontainable security and humanitarian crisis and to further foster extremism, not only in the occupied Palestinian territory and Israel, but in the region as a whole.
The two sides were involved in heavy exchange of fire and airstrikes for 11 days until a truce was agreed to on the 21st of May. While China has always considered Taiwan a rogue state and sought to reunify it with the mainland, 2021 saw Beijing take a much more aggressive stand on the issue, with Xi Jinping not ruling out military action to achieve his goal.
祖国完全统一的历史任务一定要实现，也一定能够实现。
Beijing sent hundreds of warplanes into Taiwan's air defense zone, and Taipei responded by scrambling jets and activating its missile air defense systems. Taiwan also firmed up ties with the US and other Western countries in a bid to ward off China's intimidation tactics. The cross-strait tensions have now pitted China against the US-led West, with the Biden government even committing to defend Taiwan if Beijing attacks.
中国从来没有对世界去讲说他要放弃对台湾使用武力，他现在正在做的就是不断的去准备要使用武力来解决台湾问题。
Taiwan's defense minister described the current tension with China as the worst in 40 years and even warned that China will have the ability to mount a full-scale invasion by 2025. Now, as Xi Jinping strives to etch his name alongside other top personalities of the Communist Party, tensions are only likely to escalate in the year ahead. The Cold War may have ended 30 years ago, but Russia and the West continue to spar over Ukraine, a former member of the Soviet Union, over its bid to strengthen ties with the West and join NATO.
Let's be clear that Russia started this war, and Russia is the obstacle to a peaceful resolution.
Moscow has reportedly deployed around 100,000 troops, armed with a large number of tanks, artillery, missiles and air defense systems close to the Ukrainian border, leading to apprehension that Putin could be planning a repeat of the 2014 invasion. The US has even predicted that Russian forces at the Ukraine border could rise to 175,000 by the end of January, and Western intelligence reports suggest that Moscow could be planning a military offensive at the end of January 2022. While Russia has refuted allegations that it is planning an invasion and NATO and Moscow could hold talks in January, Putin has warned the US and the West against crossing its red lines and has even threatened military measures to counter any unfriendly moves.
В случае продолжения явно агрессивной линии западных коллег мы будем предпринимать адекватные ответные военно-технические меры. На недружественные шаги жестко реагировать. И, хочу подчеркнуть, имеем на это полное право. Имеем полное право на действия, призванные обеспечить безопасность и суверенитет России.
In retaliation, both the United States and NATO members have warned Russian President Putin of severe consequences and harsh economic sanctions if Moscow attempts any misadventure.
We see no sign that this build-up is stopping or slowing down. On the contrary, it continues. This build-up has no justification. It is provocative, it is destabilizing, and it undermines security in Europe.
Meanwhile, Ukraine President Zelensky has been pushing NATO to grant membership to the country, even as Moscow has threatened NATO against any expansion further to the east. So is a war between the East and the West imminent over Ukraine? It remains to be seen how the deepening crisis will unfold in 2022. "2021 saw the return of the Taliban in Afghanistan. After 20 years of US presence, the militant organization clawed its way back amid a poorly executed US withdrawal from the war-torn country. On the 15th of August, after the US and NATO troops' withdrawal, the Taliban seized Kabul without much resistance. And with their return, Afghanistan descended into complete chaos yet again. Disturbing scenes of desperate Afghans trying to flee the Taliban-controlled nation flooded social media. Images of Afghans falling from the wheels of departing aircraft also went viral. Afghan citizens, especially women and children, and those who worked closely with the US and NATO, were forced to flee the Taliban rule, turning millions into refugees staring at an uncertain future.
Even a country that has tragically known generations of conflict, Afghanistan is in the throes of yet another chaotic and desperate chapter, an incredible tragedy for its long-suffering people. Afghanistan is spinning out of control.
Although a new Taliban government was formed in Kabul, it has been globally criticized for not being inclusive. Despite its tall promises on human rights, Afghanistan has seen the return of repressive diktats and the oppression of women. The war-torn nation has been grappling as well with a financial crisis. The United Nations also saying that Afghanistan's economic meltdown is one of the worst in history. The country's decade-long experiment with democracy ended on the 1st of February, when Myanmar's military seized power from its elected government. Myanmar's top leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested after a military coup, and a year-long state of emergency was declared. The events led to a series of mass protests against the military that has left 1,300 civilians dead so far. Over 10,200 people have been detained, including more than 2,000 women. Human rights groups have been alleging widespread violence in the country ever since the February coup. Reports claim that women in Myanmar are being subjected to torture, to sexual harassment and rape threats in custody. Recently, Suu Kyi has been sentenced to 4 years in prison for inciting unrest against the military and for violating COVID guidelines. Already dealing with the severe impact of the COVID pandemic, the geopolitical conflicts that erupted in 2021 have left an indelible mark on the world. And while the year ends, the chaos,